Welcome to another episode of The Inquisitive Analyst. I'm your host, Marcus Udikang. It's the show where we chat with business analysts and project managers about their challenges and triumphs and their contributions to their field. It's inspiring, it's upbeat, but most of all, it's inquisitive. My guest today is an innovator with a background in electrical engineering and a doctorate in psychology. He's the author of 16 books on topics about leadership, teams, project management, and problem solving. He's also a speaker, certified coach, and founder and CEO of the Lewis Institute. Please help me welcome to today's show, Jim Lewis. Welcome, Jim.
Good morning. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us all the way from North Carolina.
Sure. Nice thing
So
about Zoom is you can be anywhere.
you can be anywhere. That's true. That's true. Okay, so Jim, you've been working in project management for about 4 decades, probably a lot longer than most of us. And what I find astonishing is that you're still highly active in the field. So let's start off by asking the obvious. First, how did you get started as a project manager? And why are you still so passionate about project management today?
Well, as you said, I started out my career as an electrical engineer doing design work. And I've been a ham radio operator from the time I was 16 and went through college and got my degree and started a job at a little company called Aerotron. And the first project I had was to change a vacuum tube in a little transceiver to upgraded model. And although it was essentially a one person job just to do that upgrade, it had to then go to mechanical engineering where they made the proper drawings, and we had to do test models and submit those to the factory and all that. So it quickly became a multi-person project, even though it was essentially one person to start with. And I worked at that company for about 7.5 years, worked my way up to chief engineer. Knew really nothing about project management in a formal sense. It was all what I call seat of the pants project management. Company went through a merger, and as you probably know about mergers, the company we merged with took control and cleaned house. So they came in and started replacing all the managers with their own people. And took them a couple of months to get to me. I knew I was on their hit list, and I'd been looking around and hadn't found anything. But fortunately, when they finally got to me on a Monday morning, a week later, I was working at ITT Telecom. So I was only out of work a week. But I was so annoyed by that circumstance that I swore nobody would ever do that to me again. So for the 8 years that I was at ITT, I was looking for a way to change my career. And about the sixth year that I worked at ITT, I got into a master's program in psychology and went on and got a doctorate. And the reason I was so attracted to it was because having been an engineer for so many years, I knew very little about how to deal with the people issues in the projects. And uh, that was really the essence of what project management's all about. And I should say I did get to take a course finally about the third year that I worked at ITT, taught by a fellow named Jim Bradford, who was a NASA engineer. And Jim had gone back to Vanderbilt University to get a MBA, and seminar company up in New York found out about him and asked him to teach a course in project management, which he did. Jim had an annual budget of $400 million just for his little piece of the NASA space program, because this was in the 70s. And I got the fundamentals, the nuts and bolts, work breakdown structures, and critical path scheduling and all that sort of thing from Jim. And I was also getting ready to transition into my new career, whatever that was going to be. And Jim said, well, why don't you talk to Penton Learning Systems, because they'd probably be really happy to get you to teach for them. I actually proposed a course in decision making problem solving because that was something I was very interested in. They came back to me with a counter proposal saying, we know it's useful, but we can't sell it. Would you be willing to teach leadership skills for project managers? Well, that's like asking a pig, do you like to be in a pig pen? And It was perfect because I did my master's thesis and my dissertation both on leadership, and did a lot of study, all the literature on leadership. And so I did a field study on how people in the field actually change their leadership style based on the performance of their subordinates. And so that led me right into it. So why am I still passionate about it? It's a long story and I'll keep it short. I met Alan Mulally at Boeing when he was still the CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Wrote a book about his management approach. And the reason I went to see him in the first place was I had watched the Chronicle of 21st Century Jet. He was the chief engineer on the 777 when the program started. And I asked him if I could come out and talk to him about how they manage programs that big, because the only way at that point that I could keep up with the technology and what was going on was to talk to people in the field. And so I got permission to come in and see him. And one of the first things he told me was, we don't really differentiate very strongly between project management and general management. And if you think about it, all the tools of project management actually came from manufacturing. They were the first set of tools created to manage work in general. And for that reason, every single tool of project management is applicable to general management. In fact, they are the most rigorous form of general management that you'll find. So I'm very enthusiastic about the idea that CEOs should be running strategic initiatives with project management. Uh, I did a I did a talk for Secretary's Day, the satellite program that Amacom used to run, and talked about admin people and secretaries helping people with projects. They do projects all the time. And you don't need the full ball of wax. You don't need the whole toolkit. So the trick is to pick and choose what's necessary to get the job done. And I believe in the KISS principle, keep it as simple as you can to get that work done. So that's that's the long and short story of it.
I think it's very poignant. So can you tell us a bit about the Lewis Institute, which you run? What services does it provide?
Yeah. Um, when I got into my psychology program, I actually did it by accident. I took a course in organizational psychology because I had 63 people in my department at that time and knew very little about how to motivate or manage people. And so I thought, well, that really looks good, and fell in love with the course. It was taught by the head of the psych department, and I aced it. And I said, hey, I'd like to switch from, I was going to get a Master of Economics degree because they didn't have an MBA program at that time. And so Howard said, sure, we'll be glad to have you in the program. And I was just going to get a master's. And by the time I finished that, I'd taken additional courses and decided there was no point in wasting them. So by the time I got accepted into the doctoral program, I was through with the coursework. And so that was the transition point, and it was why I got into the program in the first place. I'm not sure I answered your question because I frankly lost track.
That's okay.
That's
That's
what
okay.
that's what happens when you're my age.
Yeah, no, it's about, yeah. So actually, the Lewis Institute itself,
Oh, okay.
yeah, you've got about, well, you've trained about 60,000 people over what, 30 countries or something like that, up to date.
Yeah, I founded the Lewis Institute because, in fact, the first name I used for the Lewis Institute was Effective Human Performance, because my idea was if I could help people and organizations perform at the best possible level, I could make a bigger impact than I could as a therapist, for example, because in therapy, at the best, you can handle a group with maybe 6 people, 6, 7 people in it, or you do individual therapy. And with a corporation or a company of some kind, you can make a big impact. So my first teaching, of course, was that leadership skills for project managers course. I did that for a short period of time. We had a recession and the course quit selling because companies won't pay to send people to soft skills courses. They don't understand that soft skills are the only skills that really affect the bottom line. Maybe they'll get that one of these days, but long story short, personal computers were coming out at about that point in time. And I bought what became a dinosaur very quickly, the old Apple III, which was their business computer. And I was talking to the CEO at Penton Learning Systems and mentioned that I had a computer. And he said, "You got a computer. How'd you like to teach project management in the personal computer?" And I said, "Sign me up." Okay. Now you got to understand, I barely knew how to turn the darn thing on, but I figured if I could stay a day ahead of the students, I was okay. And because nobody else knew how to use them at that point in time either. And so my classes were filled with people that were in their 50s and 60s and were intimidated as much as I was by the computer, and would tell me stories about how their grandchildren had to show them how to get the thing turned on, and they were afraid to touch a key because the thing might explode on them. And the first classes we taught were on old Apple IIe's, and we soon learned that business people didn't want to learn how to use Apple IIe's because what they had at work were IBM's. And so I went through the era of the floppy disk drive, and with 512K of storage space, and a 10 megabyte hard drive. And so what we have now makes that thing look like a pencil with no eraser on it.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I remember those were the days that memory was very, very expensive.
It really was.
Yeah. So one of the things you're focused on is integrating innovation and project management. Can you elaborate on what this encompasses?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a Google alert at one time on innovation, and I was getting about 10 alerts a day, and people all over the world are saying we have a crisis of innovation. We have a crisis of innovation. Strange thing is, you can't sell courses on innovation, and yet we really need not only innovation but creativity, and there is a difference between the two. Creativity is coming up with something totally new, and innovation is improving on things that already exist. And it turns out that most Myers-Briggs SJ managers prefer innovation because they're afraid to take big risks. And in fact, I consider the accounting system to be one of the biggest detriments to innovation, because the accounting system looks for uh, goals that must be met every 30 days. And so you dare not do anything that might be detrimental to your bottom line. For that reason, a lot of organizations are very afraid to do anything innovative. And only companies like Apple, where Steve Jobs could pretty well do whatever he wanted to, were willing to take those big risks of creating something as far reaching as the iPhone and the what did he call his little music player?
Well, there was the Nano. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, which I can't think of the name of offhand, but you remember he held it up and he said 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Oh, the iPod, I think it was.
The iPod, yes. Yeah. And that just really said everything to the people that bought those things at that point in time. That thing was about $400, I believe, when it first came out. And of course, the early adopters will buy those kinds of toys because it's so brand new and exciting and the whole bit. And that was Jobs' talent. He was able to think like the user and come up with something that was really, really innovative, creative. And here's the thing: not only is innovative necessary to produce new products, we need innovation in how you manage projects. We need to come up with new ways to organize, new ways to manage teams. And as much as everybody is crazy about hearing about COVID right now, it is forcing new ways of working. Ford Motor Company has already said that they are never going back totally to the old way, that they're going to continue to have uh, people working at home because it just makes good sense. And while education has had some real problems, we're going to come up with innovative ways to do that. In my own business, where we teach seminars for adults, my partner, who does all the teaching now, has gotten very innovative at how he engages with adult learners. And you don't see too many of them falling asleep. If they do it on Zoom, of course, you see them nod off. So it's going to be a very interesting next decade or so.
Excellent. So what's your idea of the role of the project manager?
Well, one of my favorite TED Talks was done by Ben Zander. He's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And Ben was raised in England. He's married to a lady named Rosamund Stone, was her maiden name. And they did a book a few years ago called The Art of Possibility, which is on my top 10 reading list. So Ben did a talk at TED on leadership, and he made a comment that when he was in his 20s, I think he's like 25 years old. No, he had to be older than that. He'd been conducting for 20 years. So he must have been around 45 or so. He had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that the conductor of the orchestra doesn't make a sound. And as he says, he depends for his power or strength on making it possible for that group of players, that group of musicians to do their thing. And so it's an enabling. And I had read a book by Jan Carl Zahn, or Jan Carl Zahn, I suppose, called something about a moment. I can't think of the title right offhand, but anyway, he was the youngest CEO of SAS Airlines, and a moment of truth. He said every interaction between an employee and a customer was a moment of truth, and that you had to make it possible for them to do their thing without having you look over their shoulder and tell them what to do and what not to do. And so he inverted the hierarchy. He turned the pyramid upside down. He said, I'm down here at the bottom and I'm supporting everybody else. A lot of people call that servant leadership. And I don't like the term simply because the word servant has negative connotations, but it certainly is the role that a project manager has to play. You have to make it possible, especially in a multidisciplinary project team, which is all I ever ran. I'm an electrical engineer. And even as an electrical engineer, I'm an analog designer. And the last project we did was a fully synthesized single sideband receiver. Translate that into, it had a lot of logic circuitry in it. And I never took any logic courses in engineering because when I went through engineering school, you didn't have logic in radios. That's how fast it changed over the next 10 to 15 years. So I had to rely on my digital people to do their jobs. And all I had to do was make sure that they had the wherewithal to do them. And so to me, it's a people job. It's about helping your people perform at their best. It's about knowing how to motivate people, or you can't really motivate people, but knowing what does motivate them and how to create conditions under which they will be motivated. And in some cases, like in construction, it's about interfacing with contractors and negotiating and making sure that they stay on top of things. And one of the things that's really important is to monitor your critical path schedule. And something that a lot of people don't understand about critical path scheduling, everybody pays attention to what's on the critical path. That's understandable. What they sometimes forget is that paths off the critical path, if you don't watch out, if you let them slip very long, they become the critical path. And so a little simple task that you didn't think had any relevance at all suddenly starts to sink your ship. And those are the kinds of things that you're a really glorified conductor of an orchestra, if you will.
I like that analogy. That's quite good. So on the subject of project planning, why do we need planning in a project? And how do you determine how much planning is needed for a project?
Well, it starts with the definition of control. The definition of control is very similar to piloting an airplane. if you don't have a flight plan saying where you're trying to get to and how you're going to get there, you're going to wind up in the wrong place. And so the pilot nowadays, of course, they just set the plane on a GPS target and it goes there essentially. So if it automatically takes care of drift. But in the old days, they had nothing but a compass, and your plane was flying off course because the wind was blowing it off course. And when Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic the first time, he couldn't stay awake the whole time. And so he'd fall asleep. And when he woke up, he didn't know where the heck he was. And it's just a miracle that he landed within 500 miles of where he was supposed to. Because when you go 4,000 miles and you hit a target that small, that's not too bad. So anyway, control is defined as comparing where you are to where you're supposed to be, and then taking corrective action if you have deviations from where you're supposed to be. And it's your plan that tells you where you're supposed to be. So it follows that if you have no plan, you have no control. You think you do because all these crises that you react to and bring things back on target are a form of control of a different kind. It's damage control, so to speak, or deviation control. But basically, you need a plan to begin with. So I need a map that tells me how I'm going to get there, and that's a good analogy for a plan. And I need to know what the destination is. And if the destination changes midstream, I have to change the plan to accommodate it. So if you have no plan, you have no control. Now, how long should it take? General rule of thumb is that an hour spent planning will save you about 3 hours in execution time. And that's just a very rough guideline. Some projects don't need much planning. And by the way, back in the early days when I was starting to teach, the people at General Electric had come up with some really neat approaches to overhauling power generators and refueling power plants. When they refueled the very first power plant, I think it was offline for 2 years. You're losing $1 million a day when it's offline. By the time I wrote my first book, they had gotten it down to 30 days, and they had done it with extreme planning. And I'm talking about planning down to the 15-minute increment. When you refuel that thing, they used to let them cool down. By that point in time, they were working on it hot, so to speak. And they would send a person down into the cavity after they got the rods and stuff pulled out and secured. And that person could only work down there for about 15 minutes, and the suit that they wore had dry ice in it to keep them cool. So you go down there and you break a nut loose with a wrench and get the heck out, and somebody else goes down. But they had so much history that they were able to create a schedule from a library. Same thing with overhauling power generators. You don't want that thing offline very long. And so you have a library of here's what it takes to replace an armature, or here's what it takes to replace brushes. And they would go down and survey when a unit went down and radio back up to the planning room and say, well, we don't need to do this, but we ought to do that other thing. And they'd put together a network based on the library that they had. And so they had a schedule just like that. And then the plan, those generators can only be offline for a couple of weeks to at the most about 5 weeks, and it's costing you a lot of money. That's why you do it.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, they say that of any project, 70% is planning. That's what I've heard. Yeah. So
yeah.
Oh, excellent. So in the case of learning project management tools and techniques versus acquiring a professional certificate in the field, what's more important and why?
That certificate will do nothing but prove that you're an idiot if you don't know how to run a project. Because anybody can memorize the questions that are on the exam. Now, PMI had a proper objective when they started that program. You're supposed to have 4,000 hours of work experience leading projects, not being a member of a team. And I'm going to be totally candid. There are people who are just certifying that they did that when they really didn't. And so they can pass the 200 question exam. That's just memorization. But if you put them in the field with your money at risk, they're going to screw you because they don't know what they're doing. And that was the idea. That's why the Obama administration passed the requirement that if you're going to do a government contract, you had to have a PMP assigned to it so that your money was not going down a rat hole somewhere. So our approach is we have a 5-course certificate with 3 core courses. There's one called Project Management Tools, Principles, Practices, which gives you all the basic tools. We have one called Leading Project Teams because you need to know how to manage and build a team. And then we have one called How to Communicate, Influence, Negotiate. That's 3 core techniques, methods that you need to know. And then you can pick from 2 courses from a list of options that are available to you, electives as we used to call them. And so our objective is to teach you how to actually run that project so that once you get certified, it means something. One of the best ways to do that is with a simulation. And I've recently come across a fellow that's building learning simulations for project management because as much as we try to create a simulation in our classes, it's very difficult to do. You need to put people through skill building exercises in class. And what really scares the heck out of me is the trend today for people to offer these $49 classes on project management and create the belief in the minds of not only the learner, but the people that employ those people that they've been properly trained, and they haven't. I have for a long time resisted the pressure to teach a project management class in a day if what they wanted to do was actually run projects. Now, I'll teach a 1-day overview for executives on what project management is about. But if the person's going to actually put my money at risk, you can't teach them how to do project management in a day. It's like asking a brain surgeon to do one operation and go from there and start doing brain surgery on everybody. So that's my philosophy about the whole thing.
I think that's a good philosophy. So looking back, right, what's been your biggest mistake in the field of project management, and what did you learn from it?
I think the biggest mistake I made was when I worked at ITT, and we had to design a new receiver, HF single sideband receiver, to replace a previous generation unit. And the challenge was that we had to cost reduce it 30%. In other words, we had to build it for 30% less than the previous model. And instead of tuning in 100 hertz increments, it had to tune in 10 hertz increments. So we had to make it perform better. We also had to increase the intermodulation distortion capabilities so it was more selective. It could reject interference better. In other words, we had to make it perform like a Cadillac for the price of a Chevrolet. And great challenge. I love that sort of thing. That's where the innovation comes in. We designed a totally modular unit so that you could change a module and have that thing running again in about 10 minutes. The reason for that is an oil tanker sitting in port cannot sail without that radio. It's life-saving. And it cost $100,000 a day back in 1970 for them to sit in port waiting for you to fix the radio. And so for us to be able to exchange a module, take the module back to the shop and repair it at our convenience, save them a huge amount of money. Now, the mistake I made was I had a brand new crew of people. None of us knew beans about designing a synthesizer. Like I say, the guy that was a digital guy had worked on courses toward a PhD, but he hadn't finished his program yet. And we had no experience by which to make estimates. You know, when you're trying to estimate how long cutting edge technology is going to take, you might as well throw papers down a stairwell and see where they land. You know, it's about that accurate. And so, and the biggest mistake I made in the project was planning in more detail than I could manage. That's a rule that I've taught to this day. Don't ever plan in more detail than you can manage. I was planning to the nearest day, and the best we could manage was at least to the nearest week. And of course, once you put together a plan to the nearest day, the powers that be are looking at it and monitoring it. And as soon as you're off target, they want to know why. And it was really funny. One of my guys was a fellow from India, and I'd hired him away from a major uh, company that was a competitor. And the director went in the lab one day and started leaning on this guy about why was he not getting his work done as fast as he thought it should be done. And when he left, this guy looked at me and says, Jim, putting two jockeys on one horse will not make him run faster. Which I thought was awfully on target, you know, because putting a lot of pressure on a knowledge worker is not going to make him do his work better or faster. So that was the big mistake. I learned an awful lot from that. And in fact, it was the last project I ran. I was finished by the time I got through with that one. But that radio worked, and I found a review a few years ago on the internet of a ham radio operator who had managed to get one of them, and he was raving about it. And it made my ego feel really good that, you know, in the long run, we were vindicated, even though we missed all our targets.
That's amazing.
Well, we did meet the cost target. We just didn't meet the schedule target.
Okay. Oh, excellent. I was going to say that it's always an honor to talk to you. And when I did call you up originally, I mentioned that your book, Fundamentals of Project Management, one I read, the third edition, was probably one of the first books I read on project management. And I'm always going back to review it. So like I said, it's a deep honor to talk to you, and it's a deep honor to certainly interview you today.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And so in closing, how can anyone in the audience get in touch with you if they want to?
The easiest way, you know, I'm not about to give my email address over YouTube because I get about 20 spam letters a day as it is, and it used to be 100, so I'm doing pretty well. Go to my website, which is lewisinstituteinc.com. So and Lewis is spelled Lewis, institute.inc.com, and go to the contact me or contact us form and fill it out, and I'll get back to you pretty quickly.
Great. Well, thanks for the interview, Jim. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Marcus. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Well, have a great day.
Same to you. Take care.
All right, you too.